Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about one of the most confusing moments in relationships. The moment when everything feels good, connection is flowing, and suddenly the energy changes. The person who once leaned in now leans away. The warmth you felt yesterday turns into distance today. And in that silence, panic often sets in. The truth is, neither extreme serves you. Chasing puts all your power into their hands, making you dependent on their response. Ignoring for the sake of manipulation makes you act from fear, not authenticity. What you need in that moment is not to run toward or away, but to stand strong in yourself. When someone pulls back, remember this, it is not always about you. People pull away for reasons that live in their own world. Doubts, fears, uncertainty. Their space does not diminish your value. Your worth is not negotiable just because someone needs distance. Chasing in that moment feels tempting because anxiety craves reassurance. But every time you rush to fill their silence, you train yourself to believe your peace depends on their presence. Instead, let silence be a teacher. Distance has a way of revealing truth. If the bond is real, space will not destroy it. It will clarify it. What you do in that gap is everything. You can shrink into fear, or you can rise into self-priority. Invest in yourself, your passions, your friendships. Show through your actions that your happiness is not on hold, waiting for one person to decide. When someone begins to pull back, the first instinct many of us have is to take it personally. We feel a sudden shift in their tone, their availability, or their energy, and it sends us spiraling into self-doubt. We start replaying conversations in our heads, dissecting every word we said, every look we gave, and every message we sent. The mind tells us, it must be something I did. But the truth is, a pullback is not always about you. In fact, most of the time, it has more to do with what's going on inside the other person than anything you've done wrong. Human beings are complex. We all carry our own fears, histories, and emotional patterns. When someone begins to withdraw, it could be because of their own insecurities resurfacing. Maybe they're afraid of getting too close, because closeness makes them vulnerable. Maybe they're confused about what they want, and they need space to sort through their emotions. Sometimes, they might even be facing pressures outside of the relationship, stress at work, unresolved issues from their past, or responsibilities that weigh on them heavily. In these moments, their behavior reflects their inner world, not your shortcomings. The danger comes when you immediately assume responsibility for their distance. That assumption feeds a cycle where you constantly try to fix things that are not yours to fix. You might send more messages, over-explain your feelings, or try harder to prove your worth, believing that their pullback is evidence that you've somehow failed. But when you operate from this mindset, you put yourself in a position where you're chasing validation instead of recognizing your existing value. Think about it this way. Imagine someone carrying a heavy backpack filled with their own fears, doubts, and unresolved issues. You didn't pack that backpack for them, and you can't carry it for them either. When they step away, it is often because the weight they're carrying feels overwhelming, and retreating is their way of coping. If you rush in to take ownership of that weight, you're not helping, you're only burdening yourself with something that isn't yours. One of the most important truths in relationships is understanding the difference between your responsibility and theirs. You are responsible for showing up authentically, for being kind, for communicating clearly, and for treating the other person with respect. But you are not responsible for how they process their emotions, the fears they carry, or the walls they have built long before you ever came into their life. Their pullback reflects their state of mind, not your value. This doesn't mean that you ignore the dynamic entirely or dismiss the role you play in the relationship. Self-awareness is important, but it does mean that you stop automatically blaming yourself when distance arises. Instead, you step back and remind yourself their behavior is information, not a verdict on my worth. That shift in perspective protects you from unnecessary guilt and anxiety. Consider for a moment how much pressure it creates when you make someone else's behavior a reflection of you. If every time they withdraw, you interpret it as rejection, then you will always feel powerless. because you've tied your self-worth to their mood swings and uncertainty. But if you can separate their actions from your identity, you reclaim your power. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What's happening with them?" That small shift changes the way you respond. It also helps you maintain balance in the relationship. If you take every pullback personally, you'll react from fear, over texting, over giving, or over analyzing. But when you understand that their space is often about them, you allow the relationship to breathe. You can give them the room they need without losing yourself in the process. And ironically, it is in that space that true connection either grows stronger or reveals its limitations. Many times, people pull back not because they don't care, but because they're human. They feel overwhelmed, afraid, or uncertain. By recognizing that, you prevent yourself from overcompensating in ways that devalue you. Instead of shrinking, you hold steady. Instead of panicking, you observe. And instead of chasing, you let their actions show you the truth of where they stand. When someone you care about begins to step back, it's easy to forget your own value. In that silence, the mind starts to wander. Questions creep in. Am I not interesting enough? Did I say too much? Maybe I'm not what they're looking for. That internal dialogue slowly chips away at your confidence until you start to believe that their distance is proof you're somehow lacking. But the truth is, your value doesn't change just because someone creates space. The way they behave does not rewrite your worth. Value is not something that rises and falls with another person's attention. It's not a currency that someone can increase when they're close and decrease when they're far. Your value is already set, rooted in who you are, the energy you bring, and the way you live your life. What often happens when someone pulls back is that we allow their absence to distort our perspective. Their silence becomes louder than our self-belief, and we forget that nothing about who we are has changed in that moment. Think about it this way. If you own a beautiful painting, its worth doesn't suddenly drop because someone walked out of the room without admiring it. The painting remains valuable whether people are looking at it or not. The same is true for you. The attention or inattention of another person cannot alter the qualities you carry, the love you're capable of giving, or the uniqueness that makes you who you are. When you chase after someone during their pullback, what you're really doing is trying to restore your sense of worth by pulling validation out of them. You're hoping that their return will reassure you that you're enough. But that kind of reassurance is fragile because it depends on factors outside your control. The moment they step back again, the cycle repeats and your confidence crumbles once more. This is why the real work is in holding on to your value regardless of how present or distant someone else is being. Confidence in these moments comes from remembering that your worth is not negotiable. It doesn't need proving, convincing, or begging. It is expressed through how you treat yourself when uncertainty shows up. Do you immediately abandon yourself, respect and chase after answers? Or do you stand tall in the knowledge that you are worthy of consistent love, even if someone else is struggling to give it? This doesn't mean you ignore every withdrawal or pretend you don't care. Relationships require communication, and it's healthy to talk about shifts in behavior. But it does mean you approach the situation from a place of strength rather than desperation. Instead of saying, "What did I do wrong?" you remind yourself, "I am still the same person who was worthy yesterday, and I will be the same tomorrow." That mindset allows you to speak from calm rather than fear. When you internalize this, you stop seeing their pullback as a personal failure. You see it as information. Maybe it's a sign they need space. Maybe it's a signal that they're not ready for the depth of connection you're seeking. Or maybe it's just a temporary wobble. Whatever the case, you don't hand over the power of your self-worth to their actions. You hold it yourself. One of the most magnetic things a person can have is a strong sense of self, even in uncertain moments. When you show that you respect yourself, that your world doesn't collapse because someone steps back, you communicate something powerful. You are not desperate, and you are not dependent on their validation to feel whole. That energy is attractive, not only because it shows confidence, but because it sets a standard. It silently says, I will not lower my value to match your inconsistency. On the other hand, when you chase after someone the second they create distance, you unintentionally send the opposite message. You show that your worth is conditional, that it wavers the moment they do. And when you demonstrate that you don't see your own value, it becomes harder for someone else to recognize it. People often mirror the way we treat ourselves. If you respect your worth, you encourage them to do the same. So when someone pulls back, the most important thing you can remember is that nothing about you has suddenly diminished. You are still worthy of love, still worthy of attention, still worthy of a relationship where closeness doesn't come with constant withdrawal. Their distance doesn't rewrite your story, it only reveals theirs. Your job is not to chase after their approval, but to continue standing in the truth of your value. Because when you do, you create the space for the right person to step forward, the one who sees your worth clearly, whether you're near or far. When someone begins to step back, the natural reaction is often to close the gap. You feel the distance, and suddenly there's a pull inside you to chase, to reach out, to try harder so that you don't lose the connection. It comes from fear, the fear of being forgotten, of not mattering, of losing something that felt good. But chasing in those moments rarely creates the outcome you hope for. Instead, it builds an imbalance that leaves you powerless and them in control of the pace. At first, chasing feels like the logical thing to do. If they're drifting away, wouldn't it make sense to remind them of what you share? To show them you care. But the problem is not in the intention, it's in the effect. Every time you push forward while they pull back, you're reinforcing a dynamic where you're the one doing all the work. You become the pursuer, and they become the one who decides when and how much they want to engage. Over time, this sets the stage for a relationship where their inconsistency dictates your emotions. Imagine a dance where one partner keeps stepping back. If the other keeps rushing forward to close the gap, the dance becomes lopsided. There's no rhythm, no harmony. It's just one person retreating and the other chasing. The same happens in relationships. When you chase, you stop moving in sync and start moving in reaction. You give away your ability to set the tone of the connection because your actions are entirely based on theirs. What makes this imbalance even more painful is that chasing usually doesn't bring them closer in a meaningful way. It might pull them back temporarily. They might respond to your texts or give you a little attention, but it doesn't create deeper commitment. Instead, it can validate their pullback. They learn that even if they step away, you'll come running to bridge the gap. That reassurance allows them to stay in control without ever needing to meet you halfway. The irony is that chasing often pushes them further. It takes away the natural tension that builds attraction. Attraction thrives in balance. When two people invest equally, when space and closeness flow naturally. But when one person fills every gap the other creates, there's no longer any need for them to lean in. They know you'll always lean twice as far. This erodes the respect in the relationship, and without respect, love cannot flourish. Chasing also comes at a cost to you. It slowly erodes your sense of dignity and self-respect. Every unanswered message or ignored effort feels like a rejection, and with each rejection, your confidence takes another hit. Instead of showing up as your authentic self, you begin performing in ways that you hope will win them back. Being extra available, overly agreeable, or trying to prove your worth. But none of that creates real connection because it's not grounded in your truth, it's grounded in your fear. The alternative to chasing is not cold indifference or playing games. It's alignment. It's choosing to match their energy instead of overcompensating for it. If they lean in, you lean in. If they pull back, you don't chase, you allow space. That doesn't mean you ignore them completely or pretend you don't care, but it does mean you respect the balance of effort. You don't do more than your share just to keep the connection alive. You let them show you, through their actions, what they're willing to invest. When you resist the urge to chase, you preserve your power. You show that your worth is not dependent on someone else's attention. You give yourself the chance to see whether they truly want to be present, or whether the connection only exists when you're doing the heavy lifting. And that clarity is invaluable. It saves you from months or even years of one-sided effort, because it allows the truth to reveal itself sooner rather than later. Attraction, respect, and love are not sustained by chasing. They're sustained by mutual investment. When you step back instead of chasing, you create the space for that mutuality to either emerge or not. If they care, they will feel the distance and choose to close the gap themselves. If they don't, you'll know that the relationship was never built on a foundation strong enough to last. Either way, you win, because you kept your dignity intact and refused to hand over your power in exchange for scraps of attention. When distance shows up in a relationship, the instinct for many is to immediately close it. Silence feels uncomfortable, uncertainty feels threatening, and space feels like rejection. But what if space isn't always a sign of loss? What if, instead, space is the very thing that brings clarity, both for you and for the other person? Allowing space when someone pulls back can feel counterintuitive, but it often reveals more about the truth of the connection than constant pursuit ever could. Silence is powerful because it forces both sides to sit with reality without distraction. When you resist the urge to chase, the quiet becomes a mirror. For them, it shows what life feels like without your consistent presence, your attention, your energy. People often don't realize the value of what they have when it's always available. But when the noise stops, when you stop filling every gap, they're left with the space to feel the absence. That absence can stir reflection in ways words never could. For you, the space is equally important. It allows you to step out of the cycle of anxiety and chasing. It gives you breathing room to notice your own feelings rather than obsessing over theirs. You begin to see the situation more clearly. Are you clinging to the idea of what the relationship could be, or are you looking honestly at what it is right now? That clarity protects you from romanticizing their inconsistency or excusing behavior that doesn't align with the love you deserve. One of the hardest lessons to accept is that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. When you stop trying to force communication and instead allow the distance, you give the other person the chance to reveal their intentions. If they truly value the connection, the silence will pull them back in because they will feel the void of your absence. If they don't, the silence will stretch on, and in that stillness, you'll see the truth you may have been avoiding. This is why space is not something to fear, but something to respect. It's in the stillness that decisions are made, not through pressure, not through pleading, but through choice. A person who chooses to return on their own is far more genuine than someone who only comes closer because you drag them there with constant effort. You deserve someone who chooses you freely, not someone you have to convince. There's also a deeper beauty in giving space. It preserves balance. Relationships flourish when both people contribute, when there's a rhythm of give and take. But if one person fills every silence, there's no room for the other to lean in. When you step back, you create a vacuum that only they can fill. And in choosing whether to step forward, they show you exactly where they stand. This doesn't mean you withdraw as a tactic to manipulate. True space is not about punishment or playing games. It's about respect. Respect for your own boundaries and respect for their process. You're saying, in essence, I am here, but I will not overextend myself to carry both of us. That kind of stance communicates strength. It shows that your peace is not dependent on their constant presence and that you trust yourself enough to let the truth reveal itself without forcing it. Often, what people fear most in silence is abandonment. But paradoxically, it's in silence that you protect yourself from true abandonment. Because if you fill every gap they create, you risk building a connection where your needs are ignored and their inconsistencies are normalized. By allowing space, you invite the truth to surface sooner. And that truth, whether they step forward or drift away, saves you from investing in a relationship that cannot sustain you. Clarity is a gift, even when it hurts. Allowing space gives you that gift. It teaches you that silence is not always rejection. It is revelation. It reveals whether the bond is strong enough to withstand distance, or whether it was only ever sustained by your effort. And when you see that clearly, you no longer live in the anxiety of guessing games. You stand in the reality of what is, and from there, you can make choices that honor your worth. When someone pulls back, the mind often goes into overdrive. Thoughts race, insecurities rise, and suddenly it feels like every ounce of your peace depends on what they do next. You replay conversations, analyze their tone, count the minutes between their replies. That anxious energy makes you feel powerless, and in that state, it's tempting to put all your focus on them, on how to get them back, on what they're thinking, on whether they'll return. But the more you invest in that anxiety, the further you drift from yourself. The antidote is choosing self-priority over panic, because when you center yourself, you restore balance to the entire dynamic. The truth is, you cannot control how someone else shows up. You cannot control their fears, their choices, or the pace at which they move. What you can control is where your energy goes when they step back. If you pour it all into chasing answers, you shrink. You abandon your own needs in an attempt to meet theirs. But when you shift that energy into yourself, into your passions, your growth, your well-being, you remind yourself that your life is not on pause just because one person isn't giving you consistency. Self-priority in this moment is not selfishness. It is strength. It is saying, I refuse to let someone else's uncertainty create chaos within me. That means instead of spending nights staring at your phone, you fill your time with things that enrich you. Instead of questioning your worth because they're quiet, you invest in the things that remind you of your value, your friendships, your goals, your creativity. That shift does two things. It calms your own anxiety and it re-centers the balance in the connection. There's something magnetic about a person who continues to shine even when someone pulls away. It sends a clear message: my happiness is not dependent on your presence. That kind of energy is attractive because it shows resilience and independence. It communicates that you want connection, but you don't need it to survive. And paradoxically, when someone feels that, it often reignites their attraction. They realize that your world doesn't orbit around them, and that awareness can pull them back in naturally. On the other hand, when you let anxiety take over, you do the opposite. You make their absence the center of your universe. You act in ways that are not true to yourself, being overly available, over-explaining, or trying to prove you're enough. That behavior may feel like it's keeping the connection alive, but really, it drains your power and erodes your dignity. And even if it gets their attention, it doesn't inspire the kind of respect or love that lasts. Choosing self-priority doesn't mean you ignore the connection or suppress your feelings. It means you acknowledge them without letting them dictate your actions. You can care deeply about someone and still refuse to abandon yourself in the process. You can want closeness while also protecting your peace. In fact, that balance is what allows healthy love to thrive. Because love built on desperation is fragile, but love built on mutual respect and strength is enduring. There's another benefit to focusing on yourself. When they pull back, it gives you clarity. When you're no longer consumed by the need to chase, you can step back and see the situation for what it is. You begin to ask better questions. Is this connection truly giving me what I need? Am I feeling secure and valued, or am I constantly living in uncertainty? Those questions lead you toward truth, and that truth frees you from holding on to something that may not be right for you. And here's the reality: if someone truly wants to be in your life, your self-priority will not push them away. It will inspire them. It will show them that you are a whole, confident person who knows how to love without losing yourself. The right person will meet you in that energy. The wrong person will drift away. And that too is a gift, because it clears the space for someone better aligned with your worth. When you choose self-priority over anxiety, you break the cycle of fear-driven reactions. You stand in a calm, centered energy that says, I value myself enough to not abandon me, even when someone else does. And that energy doesn't just change how they see you, it changes how you see yourself. It reinforces the truth that no matter who pulls back, your life, your joy, and you're worth keep moving forward. When someone